some people perceive it to be barbaric and very cruel. And one of the next statements that comes out whenever the word Sharia law is used is cutting off of hands, chopping off of people's heads, stoning people to death, and so on. And one of the verses that is mentioned in Surah Al-Ma'idah is the rule of cutting the hands of the thief. وَالسَّارِقُ وَسَارِقَةُ فَاقْطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands this. Some people think that it's just a blanket policy that if anybody steals, you just cut their hand off. But this is not the case. There are rules and regulations related to it. First and foremost, the thing that is stolen, it has to be something valuable. It should not be something that doesn't hold any value. There has to be a minimum value attached to it. Secondly, the thing needs to be protected. Okay, so for example, if you leave your bike outside, unlocked, unprotected, unguarded, and somebody steals it, then that thief, although he will be punished for it, it's not enough for him to have his hand cut off because that property was not protected, it was not locked, it was left carelessly. So the owner has to bear some responsibility for it, and the thief, although he will be punished to a lesser degree, but his hand will not be cut off. The other thing is that the thief himself, he must be sane, meaning he must not be a crazy person, he must be an adult, and he must not be needy. Okay, so for example, if a person is needy, hungry, and he steals food to provide for his family, then also he is not to be held accountable for these things. And on top of that, the person who's stealing, the act of stealing, needs to be seen by two witnesses who see the act, who are interviewed separately by a judge, and their story must corroborate, and there must not be any conflict between the two. After all of these things, then and only then the hand is cut off. And of course, this is not done in any type of vigilante way, but it has to be done where there's an Islamic government and the judge passes the rule, and then and only then the hand is cut off. Other than that, it's not like a blanket policy in Islam that you just cut off people's hands. This is not the case. In any case, the ayah is in Surah Al-Ma'idah, وَالسَّارِقُ وَالسَّارِقَةُ فَاقْطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا. The next thing that I want to talk about, which is mentioned towards the end of Surah Al-Ma'idah, is the prohibition of alcohol and how the alcohol became prohibited ultimately. So in the beginning of Islam, there was no prohibition on alcohol. Some people who were sensible, they asked the Prophet ﷺ about it because they saw the negative consequences of alcohol in society. So they asked the Prophet ﷺ, which is mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ. They're asking you about alcohol and gambling. You know, what is the ruling related to it? We see it's negative, but we also see that Islam has not prohibited it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the beginning, He said, فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. There is a huge harm in it, and there are some benefits. Okay, so even to this day and age, doctors will tell you that if you have a glass of wine at dinner, it reduces cholesterol and so on. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that 1400 years ago. There are benefits in it too, but the harm outweighs the benefits. وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. So it's like somebody tells you that anything, for example, smoking. Okay, here's cigarettes. It will make you feel good for a few minutes, but then it's addictive. It will give you lung cancer. It will give you emphysema. It will give you this disease and that disease. Okay, so the benefit of a small amount of relaxation is basically outweighed by so many different types of harms that can continue, that will harm a person in the future. Okay, so this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said right at the very beginning when people asked Him. And remember that there were many Sahaba and the Prophet ﷺ himself who never ever touched alcohol. Abu Bakr Siddiq was famous for not touching alcohol. And the Prophet ﷺ never touched alcohol, never drank in his life. And then there were other Sahaba, by force of habit, had always been drinking, and of course it had not been prohibited until later on in Islam, which I'm going to talk about. So this was the first stage. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. The harm outweighs the benefit. The next stage was when certain Sahaba, sometimes they used to come and after drinking, they used to start praying. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verse, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى. O people of Iman, don't come close to the salat while you are in the state of intoxication. Why? Because while people were intoxicated, they were reading verses of the Quran, mixing them up, changing the meaning, and specifically mentioned in one riwayah is that a person was leading the salat. He said, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. O disbelievers, I worship what you also worship. So basically, I worship the statues that you worship. So after these kinds of events started happening, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited people from drinking while coming to pray. And then obviously, when a person is praying 5 times a day, when is he actually going to get to drink? Only maybe at night before going to sleep. So again, the habit was subsided and became less and less. The third stage took place when it's a riwayat of Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas. He mentions that a few Muhajirin and Ansar got together in a garden in Medina, and they were basically eating and drinking when it got to a point that people got drunk, and then the argument started as to who was better, the Muhajirin or the Ansar. Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas stood up and said, the Muhajirin are better than the Ansar. One of the Ansaris, again drunk, he punched him and put a gash on his nose. He cut his nose up. So Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas came to the Prophet ﷺ, complained, and then after that, the third stage of prohibition came down, which is mentioned in Surah Al-Ma'idah. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِنَّمَا الْخَمْرُ وَالْمَيْسِرُ وَالْأَنصَابُ وَالْأَزْلَامُ رِجْسٌ مِنْ عَمَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O people of Iman, indeed, khamr, alcohol, maysir, gambling, ansab, the statues, and azlam, which is basically divining or fortune-telling arrows, they are all rich, impure from the habits of the shaitan or from the deeds of the shaitan. Many people, you know what they say? They say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say it's haram. Okay? The verse doesn't say that it's haram. It only says it's impure. So basically, you're allowed to drink it. But it's still not good. That's what some people actually take from this. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say haram for a lot of things. Okay, for example, Allah says about zina, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Don't get close to zina. The word haram is not used. Okay, similarly, here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying it's rich, impure, stay away from it so that you can become successful. And then Allah says, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَن يُوقِيَ بَيْنَكُمُ الْعَدَاوَةَ وَالْبَغْضَاءَ فِي الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ وَيَصُدَّكُمْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَعَنِ الصَّلَاةِ فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. Indeed, the shaitan wants to put enmity and fights between you and hatred between you. And he wants you to prevent you from praying the salat and the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So people who get drunk, they forget their obligations to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They forget their dhikr, they forget their salat. And then at the end, فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. Are you going to stop? The Sahaba, when they heard this verse, they said, Intahayna, Intahayna. And the riwayat of Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu, he says that I was in the house of Abu Talha radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who had a hobby of collecting different types of wines and so on. I was actually pouring the wine when somebody called out in the street that the prohibition of alcohol has come down. Abu Talha said, pour it out, get rid of everything. So everything that was in his house, it was poured out. Everything that was in the house of the Sahaba, it was poured out to such a degree that it's mentioned that the streets of Medina were full of wine and alcohol. They didn't ask and they didn't wait to investigate to see whether it was true or not. As soon as the order came, everything became prohibited. So now living in a society where it's so easy for us to get alcohol. Nobody's going to prevent us because it's not illegal in this country to drink, right? Once you're 18 or 21, whatever the legal age is, you can drink alcohol. So as Muslims, we have kind of like there's a stigma associated with drinking. But the next generation, they don't have that kind of stigma anymore. Why? Because their friends around them, they're drinking. They're drinking in college, they're drinking in high school, they're drinking in parties. So we really need to make sure that our young, they're not exposed to this type of thing, or we need to talk to our young to make sure that they don't fall into the trap of these kinds of things. And also we need to understand, many people, and this is one of the biggest things that Muslims are involved in, is alcohol being sold in convenience stores. And the majority of the people that run these convenience stores, unfortunately, happen to be Muslims. Remember, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned in a hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curses 6 types of people. Every single person that is involved in the production of alcohol, all the way until the selling and consumption of alcohol. The person who squeezes the grapes, the person who puts the wine inside the barrels, and then the one who carries it, the one who carries it to the market, the one who sells it, the one who buys it, the one who drinks it. Every single person who is associated with the consumption or the production or the selling of alcohol has been cursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is, the reason for this is the detrimental effect that it has on society. Okay, so that's why when some sensible people in the 1920s tried to prohibit alcohol, there was an era here which was called the era of prohibition, when alcohol was, it was banned from society, but it didn't work out because people were not ready to accept it. But the reality is that alcohol is the worst type of drug. It is addictive, and people who get into this cycle of alcoholism, it is very, very difficult for them to pull out, and that's the reason that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited it. And this was the whole story behind the prohibition of alcohol. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us tawfiq to understand what has been said and heard.